The sun sank behind the burning mesas of Arizona, spilling molten gold across the desert as Elias Crow rode alone, his worn hat pulled low and his coat heavy with dust. He was a poor rancher, once proud, now broken by drought and debt, carrying nothing but a heart full of ghosts and a small leather pouch that held the only treasure he had left, his mother's silver locket. Tonight, he wasn't chasing cattle or land. He was chasing truth, or maybe the end of a lie that had haunted his bloodline for years. As he descended into the canyon, where the Apache campfires flickered like stars on earth, he dismounted, lifted his hands to show peace, and stepped forward into the eyes of those who had once called this land their own. From the circle of firelight emerged Nichitha, Apache Queen, her presence fierce yet calm, her hair like a river of midnight. Around her neck hung a necklace of turquoise and silver, and at its center glimmered the locket Elias had buried with his mother years ago. His breath caught, his voice cracking through the dry air as he whispered, "That necklace was my mother's." Nature's gaze did not waver. Her tone was cool as canyon stone as she answered, "Then your mother wore what was never hers. That necklace belongs to my people." The words hit him harder than any bullet could. How could his mother's keepsake now rest on the chest of the woman whose people his ancestors had fought? He took a step closer, the firelight dancing across his worn boots and hollow eyes. "My mother wasn't a thief," he said. "My father gave her that locket. He said he traded with the Apache chief for it years ago." Nichia tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Then you speak of my father," she said. The night went silent. The flames crackled softly as realization settled heavy between them, two children of enemies bound by a single piece of silver, both heirs to an old wound neither of them made. Elias swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the land pressing down on him. "Then this began long before us," he murmured. "Maybe," Nichia said, her eyes flicking toward the horizon, where dusk bled into night. "But it can end with us." Behind her, warriors shifted like shadows, waiting for a signal that didn't come. Elias straightened, chest tight with a strange courage. "Let me earn it back," he said quietly. "Not with blood, just with honor." Nichia studied him, the firelight painting her face in gold and ember. After a long silence, she nodded once. "At dawn, you will meet the spirits of the canyon. If they judge you worthy, the necklace will be yours again." Then she turned, her figure dissolving into the darkness, leaving Elias standing alone beneath a cold, endless sky. The wind brushed across the desert like a whisper from the dead, and far away, a coyote called into the night. Elias looked down at the ground beneath his boots, at the dust that carried both their histories, and whispered, "Mother, I think I just met my destiny." The first light of dawn crawled over the desert like a whisper, brushing gold across the cliffs as Elias Crow stood at the mouth of the canyon, where the air felt heavier, older, alive. Behind him, the Apache camp still slept beneath its blankets of smoke, but he could feel nature's eyes on him from afar, watching whether the poor rancher had the courage to face what he had promised. The canyon before him was called Tesbita-I, the Stone of Spirits, a place where men heard voices not meant for the living. His horse snorted nervously, as if it too could feel the unseen eyes. Elias took off his hat and crossed himself once, though he doubted any church prayer could reach a place like this. The wind hummed low through the rock walls, carrying whispers in tongues he couldn't understand. And with every step he took deeper into the canyon, the air grew colder, sharper, until even his breath sounded strange. He reached a clearing where the cliffs curved like a great open mouth. There, in the dust, lay old bones, buffalo, horse, and man, alike half buried by time. He knelt down, pressing his hand to the ground, and said softly, "If you're here, if you remember her, I need to know the truth." For a moment there was nothing, just the sighing wind. Then the earth seemed to breathe. The shadows moved. He blinked, and suddenly he wasn't alone. A figure stepped from the mist, an old Apache man draped in animal skins, eyes dark and deep as the canyon itself. "You carry sorrow," the spirit said in a voice that sounded like rain on stone. Elias staggered back, hand hovering near his revolver before he stopped himself. "I came to earn back what was stolen," he said. "The necklace. It was my mother's." The spirit nodded slowly, and before hers, it was mine. "A gift I made for my daughter Naicha." Elias's heart lurched. Then she was right. My father must have taken it. The spirit's gaze didn't soften. "Your father traded lies for peace, and your mother wore the lie close to her heart. But you, rancher, you walk with truth in your hands, though your blood carries the weight of sin." Elias swallowed, the truth cutting deeper than any blade. "Tell me how to make it right." The spirit stepped closer, and the canyon light shifted to crimson, as if the rocks themselves were bleeding dawn. "You cannot buy back honor," he said. "You must give what cannot be taken." The old man reached into the air and pulled something glowing, Elias's mother's locket, shining brighter than silver, hanging between them. "At sunset, return to my daughter. Give her the land you hold, the valley your cattle graze upon. That is the soil where her ancestors sleep." Elias hesitated. That valley was all he had left. "If I give that up," he whispered, "I'll have nothing." The spirit's eyes gleamed like stars dying in water. "Then you will have peace." And just as the first light touched the canyon floor, the vision began to fade. Elias blinked and found himself alone again, the bones still lying quiet, the wind silent once more. But the locket, his mother's locket, was gone from his pouch. He looked toward the horizon where Nature's camp waited, and for the first time he understood that this wasn't about a necklace anymore. It was about the debt carved into the land itself. He mounted his horse. By the time Elias Crow returned to the Apache camp, the sun had risen high and the desert shimmered like molten glass. Every step of his horse kicked up golden dust that hung in the air like ghosts refusing to fade. The camp was awake, now, children running between the fires, warriors sharpening blades, and women tending to smoke-dried meat butt when they saw him riding in from the canyon. Silence spread through the valley like a ripple through still water. Elias dismounted slowly, his face streaked with sweat and something heavier than fear. He could still feel the spirit's voice echoing in his chest, heavy with a truth he didn't want to face. Naicha stood waiting by the fire, her turquoise necklace catching the sunlight like a shard of the sky itself. She looked at him without a word, reading the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "I saw him," Elias said quietly. "Your father." The murmurs began, the old ones nodding with solemn understanding. "And what did he say?" she asked. Elias took a long breath, his hand trembling slightly as he removed his hat. He said the necklace was yours, that my father took it in a trade that was never true. And he said if I want peace, I have to give something back, something that can't be stolen. Nature's gaze didn't waver. And what is that? He looked toward the hills beyond the camp, where the valley opened wide stretch of green land fed by a rare spring. The same land where his cattle grazed, his only claim in this harsh world. The valley, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. He said, I must give it to you. The camp erupted in whispers against shock, disbelief, maybe even pity. Nachia studied him for a long time, her expression unreadable. That land feeds your people, she said. Without it, you'll have nothing. Elias gave a sad, crooked smile. Seems fair. My father took from your blood. I'll give back from mine. The Apache Queen stepped closer, her shadow crossing his boots. You would trade land for honor. No, Elias said softly. I'd trade it for peace. For a moment, the desert wind stilled. Even the fire seemed too quiet as Nakia reached for the necklace around her throat. My father said, no debt can outlive forgiveness, she whispered. She unclasped the silver chain and held it in her hands. If you return the valley, then the land will belong to my people again. But this. She lifted the necklace, its turquoise stones glowing like the eyes of the sky. This will belong to no one. It will pass between us as proof that peace was possible once. Elias looked at the locket, his mother's memory and her sin bound into one, and nodded. Then let it be done. He turned, looked toward the horizon, and felt something break free in his chest. Tomorrow, I'll sign the papers. The valley will be yours. Natia hesitated, then stepped forward and placed the necklace in his hand. No, rancher. Tonight, it is yours again. You faced the spirits. You gave what was asked. The necklace has chosen its path. Her fingers brushed his briefly, and in that touch there was no hatred, only the quiet sorrow of two lives tangled by the past. The wind rose again, carrying the smell of rain, rare, sacred rain. Somewhere above them, thunder rolled over the canyon like drums of the old world. Elias looked up at the darkening sky, the silver locket heavy in his palm, and said, maybe the land can forgive what men could not. And as the first drops of rain fell on the thirsty earth, it felt. The rain came slow and heavy that night, like a prayer whispered by the earth after years of silence. For the first time in a decade, the desert smelled the live wet dust, sagebrush, and smoke curling together beneath a sky split with lightning. Elias Crow sat alone beneath a canvas shelter outside the Apache camp, the silver locket resting in his palm, its chain tangled like fate itself. Each drop that struck the ground sounded like a heartbeat, like the land remembering something long buried. He could still hear the spirit's words echoing through his skull. You cannot buy back honor. You must give what cannot be taken. He had offered his land, and Nachia had offered peace, but somewhere deep in his chest, a question gnawed at him like a coyote in the dark. Could peace built on old blood ever last? From across the fire, Nachia approached quietly, her shawl damp from the storm, her hair clinging to her face in dark strands. She crouched beside him, her voice barely louder than the rain. You gave what was asked, she said, but the spirits are not yet done. Elias turned the locket over in his fingers. What more can they want? I've given everything. Nature's eyes glimmered with a strange sadness. They want truth. You've given the land, but not the story. Elias frowned, the words twisting in his mind. The story? She nodded. Your father's betrayal lives in silence. Until you speak it, the wound will remain open. Elias stared into the fire, seeing not the flames, but the face of his father, John Crow. Soldier turned settler, who once made peace by stealing what was sacred. He remembered the man's words, the pride, the lies, dressed up as honor. The memory burned hotter than the fire before him. He said he traded for it, Elias murmured. Said he gave fair price. But he didn't tell her, he didn't tell my mother where it came from. The thunder rolled overhead, long and deep, like the canyon itself groaning. Nature's hand brushed the wet dirt. Then tell it now, she said. Let the land hear it. Let your mother's spirit rest. Elias hesitated, his throat tight, his breath shaky. Then he looked toward the storm and spoke not to Nachia, not to the camp, but to the desert itself. My father lied, he said, his voice breaking through the rain. He took what wasn't his and called it peace. He wore pride like armor and left shame for me to carry. But I'm done carrying his ghosts. The wind surged and the fire flared tall, sparks twisting into the storm as if drawn to his confession. Nachia watched, her eyes wide, and for the briefest moment, the shadows around them seemed to take shape, figures of mist and memory, warriors, women, elders, all standing in the rain. They did not speak, but the air felt lighter, the ground softer beneath them. Elias felt tears he hadn't known he'd been holding, mixing with the rain. It's over, he whispered. It's time to let it go. Natcha placed her hand on his shoulder. Now the land will remember peace. The thunder eased, and the rain slowed to a soft patter. The storm was passing, but the air still shimmered with something sacred, something unseen. The Apache Queen rose, her figure outlined by the faint glow of lightning, and said quietly, tomorrow, the land will be yours, no more, but your name will no longer be cursed by it. Elias looked at her, and for the first time, there was no distance between them, no enemy, no boundary, only two souls caught in the long shadow of history. He looked down at the locket, the silver glinting faintly against the dying fire, and thought, maybe, ghosts. Dawn came soft and gray, carrying with it the hush that follows a storm. The desert lay washed clean beneath a sky of pale silver, the air cool and sharp, as if the earth itself had taken a deep breath. Elias Crow saddled his horse in silence, every buckle and strap sounding louder than it should in the stillness. The Apache camp watched him from a distance, their faces unreadable but not unkind. He could feel nature's gaze from the edge of the fire circle, calm and steady, like the first light of morning. In his coat pocket lay the deed to Crow Valley, the only piece of paper that had ever meant something to his name. Now it was about to mean something else. He mounted up, the old leather creaking beneath him, and turned his horse toward the valley he'd built with his bare hands. The trail was long and winding, the ground still damp from last night's rain, and as he rode, the memories came like ghosts riding beside him. He saw his father's shadow against the old homestead fence, his mother smile in the doorway, the endless struggle to keep cattle fed when the wells ran dry. All of it sweat, grief, pride tied to a piece of land that had never really belonged to him. The sky opened wide above, painted with light, and for the first time in years, he noticed how beautiful the valley looked. Green patches glimmering where the rain had kissed the soil, wildflowers pushing through cracks of stone. Maybe this was how forgiveness began, not in words, but in the quiet return of life. By midday, he reached the edge of Crow Valley, where the wind whispered through the cottonwoods. He dismounted, walked to the old wooden fence, and pulled the folded paper from his pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he looked out over the land, his cattle grazing in the distance, the same fields his father had once sworn to protect. "You always said this land would outlast us," Elias murmured to the empty air. "Maybe you were right, but it was never ours to begin with." He knelt, pressed the deed into the dirt, and weighted it down with a small stone. Then, slowly, he took the silver locket from around his neck, the one that had carried his mother's memory, nature's heritage, and the burden of both. He placed it atop the paper, where the two legacies could finally rest together. For a long time, he said nothing, just listened to the wind moving through the grass like a whisper of the past. Then he stood, hat low over his eyes, and turned his horse back toward the east. Behind him, the land stretched wide and wild, no longer bound to his name or his sorrow. As he rode away, the clouds broke apart, and sunlight poured through like gold dust spilling across the valley. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the Apache drums began to beat a slow, deep rhythm that rolled across the plains like a heartbeat. Elias smiled faintly. It didn't sound like morning. It sounded like home. The wind lifted his coat as he rode into the morning light, and for the first time in his life, the poor rancher felt lighter, as if the ghosts he carried had finally dismounted and stayed behind. The land was theirs now, and for him, peace was enough. Years passed, and the dust of time settled over Crow Valley like a soft shroud. The land changed hands and seasons, but the story of what had happened there never truly faded. Travelers who crossed that part of Arizona spoke of strange peace in the wind, a calm that hung over the valley even in the worst of storms. They said the grass grew greener there, the rain fell kinder, and at night, when the fire crackled low, the elders told the tale of the Apache Queen and the poor rancher who gave away his land to heal a wound older than either of them. No one knew exactly how it ended. Some said Elias Crow rode east and was never seen again. Others claimed he settled near the river, living quietly among the same people his father had wronged. But everyone agreed on one thing: the necklace was never found. The Apache said it was buried somewhere at the heart of the valley, beneath an oak tree that blooms even in drought, a place where silver meets soil and peace meets memory. They call it the Tree of Truth, and those who come to it say the wind there speaks like a voice, soft, ancient, and full of forgiveness. Sometimes, when the sun sets red over the mesas, the old ones say they can see two silhouettes standing by that tree: a man in a dusty hat and a woman wrapped in turquoise cloth, their figures fading into the light. Some say they are ghosts. Others say they are simply the spirits of the land, watching to make sure the balance never breaks again. In nearby towns, songs were written about them, ballads of the poor rancher who gave away everything, and the Apache Queen who gave him back his soul. Drifters would hum those songs while riding lonely trails, their voices carrying across the plains like prayer. And though time swallowed their names, their story lingered, not as history, but as legend. They became symbols of something rare in the Old West, a moment when two enemies laid down their pride and chose peace instead of vengeance. And in that harsh, wild country, where most tales end in blood and dust, theirs ended in quiet rain and forgiveness. Long after Elias was gone, Nachia ruled her people with wisdom, her name spoken with the same reverence as the mountains. When strangers came asking about the rancher who rode into her camp and changed everything, she would smile faintly and say, "He returned what was never his. The spirits have no quarrel with him now." Then she'd look toward the horizon, where the valley shimmered gold under the sun, and whisper words only the wind could hear. Even now, a century later, when storms roll across that desert, the rain falls heavy over Crow Valley first as if the sky remembers what the earth cannot forget. The locals still call it the valley that forgave itself. And sometimes, if you listen close enough, you can still hear hooves in the distance, the slow, steady rhythm of a rancher's final ride, and the soft echo of a woman's voice, carried by the wind, saying, "The necklace was my mother's, but peace was ours."